Welcome back to Conversations of the Leaky, Cauldron 007, chapters 26 through 30 of Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire. And back with me, as usual, sharing a drink, are Miss Sarah Miller and Mr. Wes Schantz. Welcome back, Sarah. Welcome back, Wes.
Hey, how's it going?
It's going
Greetings,
well.
y'all.
Greetings. And with the second person plural pronoun of my people, y'all, the only single word plural form of you in the English language. You know, you guys, you folks, you people, all of that. 2 words. Y'all, though, it's all encompassing. And so, Wes, on the pre-show, and as usually happens, we sometimes hit our best balls, to use a tennis metaphor, or, share our best thoughts right before we get on the air. But you were wondering about the Dark Mark and whether Sirius knew about the Dark Mark. Could you say a couple words about why that stood out to you? Because that was, like Sarah has sometimes said, she says, I have my own thoughts, but I never think the same thoughts as you. That's not something that I thought of or noticed really at all to even ask a question about.
Yeah, well, it threw me off a little bit because I assumed that Sirius, since he does know so much from being in Azkaban around these evil wizards and maybe a few other people like him who were wrongfully accused, but mostly evil wizards are in there. And so I would have thought that he would have caught sight of or overheard or somehow seen or known something about the Dark Mark being not just like something in the sky, but also something on people's bodies, because they ask him, what was going on when Karkaroff was showing Snape his forearm, like what's going on there, and Sirius is completely bewildered. And so as a reader who's read these before, but not in a long time, I was like not remembering whether we were supposed to know about the Dark Mark yet, but it sounds like that's still to be revealed.
Yeah, sorry, I was on mute. And so, Sarah, you then sort of mentioned based on that you were thinking a lot about summoning charms, and you were noticing some connections between the spell that Harry has mastered, Accio, and even used in the first task, and what the Dark Mark does, how it summons the Death Eaters directly to Voldemort. And then we had to get started.
Yeah. Then we actually decide to press record. I think it goes even like all the way back to the Burrow when I'm pretty sure Mrs. Weasley uses the summoning charm to like get all of the jokes and not so sweet sweets from Fred and George's pocket, and it's a charm that, to my knowledge, we haven't seen before up until book 4, but it seems like she drops these Easter eggs, right, for us, that they only mean something after the fact. And if I think about what does that charm do, it summons something to you, and that does seem what the Dark Mark does. It summons people, though. But, from something we've talked about in the past, like Voldemort doesn't view his followers as people. He views them as objects to collect. So I think that's an interesting paradox, right? That that something can be summoned for good use and summoned for evil use, right? That kind of plays into like what I think is a really common theme in the book, that morality is about choice and how you use magic, or how you use a wand, or how you use a broom. That there's very little that on its own is, purely evil or purely good, right?
Well, and on that note, sort of obliquely related on the source of evil, which has been part of the thing we've been thinking about, and what you bring to you and what you summon to yourself, is we finally have revealed sort of why Cornelius Fudge became Minister of Magic rather than Barty Crouch. And it was a family issue. It was an issue within his family, that
Mm-hmm.
evil sprung up underneath his nose, and he was unable to see it. He was so blind to it, so sort of self-righteous. And I suppose that also connects to the theme of blindness, which we will later see, sort of willful blindness. But to what extent, because we turn a blind eye to the flaws in ourselves or in our own sort of family units, that becomes the source of evil. And I would connect that also to what we start to learn about Tom Riddle and Voldemort, his origins, as an orphan who was, I suppose, in his eyes, mistreated. But we'll have to see. We'll have to see.
The summoning thing, to go back to that a little bit, like one of the traditional ideas of magic was that it operates through spirits, which the magician or the wizard or which summons and bids them do things. And so the magic is really the spirit doing things, but under the control of the witch or wizard, right? So in a way, like you could say that all magic is a kind of summoning, is a kind of a use of language to affect some change through a spiritual agent. And that's sort of like what a word is, I guess, is like a kind of spiritual agent. Like you hurl words at someone, or you hold back your words if you're trying to be polite or something. So there's something kind of interesting about the relationship between magic and words that makes me think of too. And like the dark mark is something you can just show it to somebody. You can just see it. It's inscribed on your body. Like it's not a spell the same way. But then to like make it appear in the sky for everyone to see, you do have to use a wand and say whatever the magic word is that makes it appear. I forget, but we heard it, right? We heard it back in the beginning of the book, I think. So there's something weird going on there. There's something I think about the bubblehead charm, even like why it is that they can't find the bubblehead charm in any book, and yet 2 of the 4 champions know about it, use it apparently without any problems. They're always sort of like looking up more spells as if they're things that are just going to be in books. I think that might be, if Hermione's got a weakness, it's that she's overly sort of emphasizing certain kinds of magic over others that might be more incarnate.
And we do see
a great.
Yeah. Go on,
I
Sarah.
was just going to say that's a great. I was just going to say that's a great word, right? And I don't know that just because I think we brought it up before. Maybe I brought it up around Christmas time, but like the 4th book is about things like becoming in motion, right? Where like maybe the words or the books or the lessons don't necessarily cover everything that you need to know. And it's interesting that like you can learn things by looking as opposed to by reading or listening, as is the case with the pensieve. The pensieve.
And so let's talk about the pensieve and what that pensieve is and what it reveals. Wes, you said you were interested in it too. Could you walk us through that a little bit and what was interesting about the pensieve? What about it was embodied too, if that theme applies at all to it? What did you think of it?
The first thing that I would note about it is how Harry sort of sees it glowing, in the cabinet there. And it's kind of resembles at first the Goblet of Fire, I thought. It's, a stone bowl that's got some creepy, lambent kind of light coming from it. And Harry sure enough, his curiosity overpowers him, not knowing at all what this thing is. He's drawn into it, much as his name is drawn into the Goblet of Fire somehow, and pops out, and then he's pulled into this whole adventure. But like the idea, I guess, that you could sort of represent memories in that way also seems really similar to the dream idea, but it's sort of under conscious control, or sort of semi-conscious control. It seems like it's a lucid dreaming that Dumbledore does to like find patterns in his thoughts that he otherwise wouldn't be able to see because he's got too much going on up there. And I like the little note that like Harry has never felt that way. He's never had too many thoughts, too many memories. It's a really beautiful like interaction of sort of Harry getting to observe how Dumbledore learns things also.
And so if you were to look for a symbolic correlate of what, say, a person incarnating that sort of spirit in our world would you say that is like reading Dumbledore's journal or record of events by being able to take his perspective in that moment? Although it is not quite his perspective. He has framed the event, but you get your own. Is it like reading something of value from the past, like his journal? Yeah, I'm just wondering.
I mean, I think it even makes that connection to the Tom Riddle's diary, that Harry's like, oh shit, I've been in one of these before,
Yes, he should have learned his lesson long ago, or whatever it says. Yeah, long ago he had learned the lesson about just jumping into these things, but here he goes again. Well, let's talk some about what it is we learn. We see, was it 2 or 3 trials here? We see Karkaroff. Who else?
Bagman.
We see Bagman. That's a big surprise to us. That's a theme we're going to get into at some point in the next couple of podcasts here, the layers that are underlying this entire story that only come together later and help you to see just how substantial the situations are and how superficial your perspective was as Harry. But yeah, Bagman, Karkaroff, and an interesting divergence from the movie. This is in the movie where Karkaroff he accuses Barty Crouch's son, and he's taken away. But here it is Barty Crouch with 3 other colluders who's brought forth for the awful, awful crime. And I think this is when we learn about this of driving Neville's parents crazy through the Crucio curse. Is that right?
I think that is right. I think in the movie it's insinuated much earlier. Though I'd have to go back into the book and look, but remember when Moody does the 3 unforgivable curses on like day 1? In the movie, the way the shot is framed, it's implied that Neville has a really hard time watching the Cruciatus curse, and he even admits it at some point. Maybe it's in the 5th book or the 5th movie or something like that. But I think in this book, to my knowledge, it's the first time we've learned that his parents were Aurors and that they were really popular. I think that's where, so for Wes's like continuing appreciation of Neville, this is where you start to see, I think, like some really emerging parallels that lay the ground nicely for what we learn at the end of the 5th book. That like Harry and Neville are not as different as maybe like a yearbook would indicate. They had popular parents who were targeted by Voldemort and or Voldemort's cronies. I think the part where Dumbledore says that they don't recognize him, and Harry sat there horror-struck. He had never known, never in 4 years bothered to find out. Just like in this entire scene, he's learning things that he would otherwise never have bothered to find out. Like, what a difference it makes to literally stand in the shoes or in the mind or in the clothing of another character. Like,
And
like what does that give you? I mean, that's a kind of knowledge that you can't get in a book. That is knowledge that I think runs super deep. Even if you are reading a book and you're attempting to empathize with a character, that's not the work of always the mind alone, you know?
And that again, back to that layers theme. Wow. To know that he's dealing with that at all those times and just indicating the diversity of sorts of varieties of lives that we all have. You know, we don't live according to type. We all live very different lives from each other. But Wes, is that part of what you like so much about Neville? You have admitted that sort of constant, I don't know if it's admiration or at least affection for him, thinking he's the best, really, I think are your words, or at least in paraphrase. But is it because of his story, or is it because of his personality and how he is, or is this part of your appreciation of him?
Oh, yeah, it's a big part of it. The parallel with Harry Potter is, I think, really, like, I really like to think about Neville as being sort of like the unwritten story that's sort of coursing through all of these books. You know, so much of what makes these books interesting is the way that things are, as you say, like, she drops little hints, little Easter eggs here and there, and then only in hindsight do you see how much has been going on in the background, or, you know, in the past. The scar, right, that, you know, makes Harry Potter who he is the representation of this thing that happened in the past that the entire series is leading up to him, like, understanding, you know, and coming to terms with. And in a way, like, that's what Neville is too. He's this kid who, as we'll find out, is born on the same birthday, as has the same, you know, potential to have been the boy who lived, has had a completely, apparently, like, normal, as far as wizarding lives go, normal life, aside from this, you know, very big reveal that we're going to get here, that his parents are in a hospital and are invalid, you know, and he's been raised by his grandmother. So he's got this dynamic going on where he's, you know, completely normal and even, like, bumbling to an extent, but also, like, completely amazing, you know, sort of like a Sam Gamgee kind of character.
And so back to the family, I have a question for you, Sarah, based on that. It seems as if what we learn with the Barty Crouch part of the Pensieve, where the Barty Crouch Jr. is brought forward, and it's really pathetic. And I listened to this on Audible, and him screaming is, you know, and hearing his mother, like, burst into tears is a terrible moment. But again, we see Voldemort, orphan, evil, Barty Crouch, you know, father, career driven, possibly, you know, sort of under subtext that he ignored him, evil generated there. And then on the other side, Neville and Harry, seemingly good, even though also sort of orphans or outcasts due to the family. And I wonder if that also ties to your idea of sort of choice and free will, that all these people have been dealt terrible cards, but still two of the people transcend their situation, where two of them sort of degenerate to it instead. And that's their choice. That's frankly their choice. They can lower to their level, or they can climb out of it.
Well, and I think there isn't just one choice, right? At every there are choices, and I think there are predispositions, right? But I think it's particularly interesting, and you're right. The audio version of Barty Crouch Jr.'s trial is hard, and I think it's actually kind of cool to listen to it more than read it, because Harry is, like, a little upset by it, right? You know, is it possible that he wasn't involved? And you know, it's, again, if you were to read something like a case file, if he were to flip through a journal, I just think sometimes the visual is so much more powerful. And I would say that maybe even the audio like Harry hears, in the audiobook we hear as well. And I think particularly with that scene, what is hard for me to stomach is I think we're all teachers. We've all seen a variety of families and kids and parents, and that like choice matters. So does setting. Like context matters as well. Like, of course, the rose can rise from concrete, right? Like, long live Tupac. But the fact that the rose is planted among concrete makes it statistically less likely, or just harder to rise, right? Like, a part of me thinks that like capitulating to the thing that's easy, or the thing that's so-called evil, I feel like that's the easier route. I mean, maybe I'm just biased or something like that, but neither Harry nor Neville seem to have it easy,
Well, I'm going to ask about that.
Again, yeah. That might be an unfair characterization, to be honest.
Let's think about it. Evil is worth consideration. And Wes, what do you think of evil? Do you agree with Sarah that there is something that if evil is luring and it has to allure you, where it, like through the gate of ivory, as Penelope speaks of in the Odyssey, and good is the gate of horn, or the hard way. Do you agree with that characterization that good is hard, or takes skill, takes aim, whereas evil, can probably be done in a sophisticated way, but is the easier path in some way?
I think there's a real interesting take on that. And I know there's a classical reference to this too, but I couldn't remember what it was, where you have the father who is in a position of authority, and his child is accused, and he feels that he has to be just as harsh on his child as he is on just any other criminal who's brought before him, right?
It reminds me of Antigone. Sorry to interrupt, but
yeah, it's like an opposite. Yeah, it's an opposite. Is it Phaedo? It's not, or it might be. It's one of the early dialogues of Socrates that has a kid trying to prosecute his father for justice, a son trying to prosecute his father rather than father-son. But that is, yeah, that Antigone bit does ring true with me too, Sarah. I can think of two instances where kings did that. Well, Agamemnon sacrifices his own daughter Iphigenia to make up for missing a sacrifice to Artemis or hurting one of her stags. And also Idomeneus, one of the captains of the Achaeans, promises Poseidon to sacrifice the first thing he sees upon getting home, and his son comes to greet him first, and he sacrifices him. Dante uses that as an example of when to break a promise, by the way. But I don't know if any of those are quite right, actually,
Well, yeah, I think anyway, the idea here is like the easy thing to do might be in that case to be, partial, to be kind to one's kin, but he emphatically does not let his son off here, right? Crouch is not even going to give his son a chance to tell his side of the story, basically, right? So I don't know that, and that does seem to be the wrong choice. But I don't know. Like we have to sort of find some way to talk about what good and evil are, I think, before deciding which one is easier or harder, probably.
That's interesting too, because I know that somebody we were listening to a lot last year, Dr. Jordan Peterson, mentions that there was a debate that happened a presidential debate. I can't remember whether it was 80, 84, 88. It was around that time. And one of the candidates, it might have been Dukakis, I'm not sure, was asked I believe he had pardoned a rapist, or a famous rapist had been pardoned. And he was asked a really hard-hitting question, which was, if that happened to your wife, what would you do? And he gave a very sort of like white collar answer, like, I would let the law do what it was supposed to. And he lost favor. And sort of Peterson's analysis of that was he didn't give a human enough response, that he gave too cerebral and political a response rather than, the appropriately visceral and just one. I see that also here in Crouch, that it says when you let the system be more important than your flesh and blood, that you're starting to become sort of fascist, that you are removed from proper judgment and reality, that you are not fit for highest office.
Well, it physically deranges him, right? Because it does, take his son away, then his wife dies, kind of pines away, and it really breaks him, it seems like. So the kind of natural consequences there do seem to indicate that he messed up.
Yeah. And what do you think it means for the fact that oh, sorry, go on, Sarah. Yes. I
was just going to say that if he wasn't originally involved in the torture, then it really does seem that his father's treatment had an enormous negative consequence, right? Like if he was involved and his father, do you know what I'm talking about?
Is that a possibility? That's something I was wondering. So the situation for the
I think Harry's question is extremely important, and the fact that Dumbledore says I don't think Dumbledore has an answer. Dumbledore shook his head. As to that, I have no idea.
That's right. Yes.
But I think if his son was involved and he was just a really good liar, and he did the thing that probably hurt on a human level, but the thing that he thought was either right or politically expedient. And I do think that those two things, that matters, the distinction within himself about why he made the decision to send his son to Azkaban. Did he think it was going to win him votes, or did he think it was I'm upholding the law, and this is a really serious crime. Yes, he's my son. I'm going to go home and cry about this, but I can't let this slide, morally, right? But if the son wasn't involved, then I think that is a really important part of the question of where does evil come from? Because if the son wasn't involved, then this wasn't then his choice to get involved later is what, vengeance? Is it comeuppance for your dear old dad and the world as a consequence? Did you get converted in prison? I mean, and I think that's an important question. I know that we get a lot of testimony later on from the character, but I think that's an important part of the conversation, at least at the moment.
I mean, that would be an apex level tragedy, false accusation by your trusted father. But Wes, what do you think of that? Did you make that connection as well, that perhaps the younger son could be innocent? He does scream in a very harrowing and pitiful way on the Audible book. I could see where that opinion might come from pity, at the very least.
Yeah, and well, I mean, and I think we're kind of given a lot from Sirius here when they go and talk to him outside the turnstile, or the last stile, and they go up the mountain to the rocky cave, and he's telling them about what things were like back then and how scared everyone was, and how Crouch was taking really, really drastic measures, which was at the time popular, but in hindsight, and especially from Sirius's point of view, was messed up, because Sirius was wrongly accused and summarily tossed into Azkaban for life, right? So this kind of draconian response to what is admittedly a terrible situation is going to breed more acrimony, bitterness
Yes.
down the line, like regardless of what actually happened, and that seems to be sort of like Dumbledore's, like the other extreme of that, right? Like Dumbledore always seems to forgive and seems to trust, and that also, well, doesn't always work out.
That's so interesting. It does seem like the evil here does need stirring up, and that Dumbledore, like Zeus at the end of the Odyssey, sues for peace. Zeus throws that thunderbolt and says enough between the families of the suitors and Odysseus. Spoiler alert for those of you reading the Odyssey. And but that evil comes in that particular sort of form and way that it's almost, because of those draconian measures, because of the cruelty because of the fire meeting fire, more fire is produced. Seems to be the idea that ire produces additional ire, and that you don't want to win the battle. I sound like a coach here, but you want to win the war.
I do think that this sort of plays into like a larger political claim of in times of crisis, what is the proper response versus what is the likely response. I think we talked maybe a long time ago about the ways in which maybe like the makeup of the school, its placement, some of its dynamics are a nice reflection of stuff of kind of like Britain at the early 1990s, right? An emerging multicultural Britain. In times of trial and crisis, there's so many examples, even just from the 20th century, of genuine terror yielding a draconian response, and having the consequences of that be like not good, and people don't feel any safer. I mean, you and I, all of us, this has been the last 18 years of our lives. Like, we've lived in a world that has been, in a country that's been like gripped by panic off and on. And some of that panic is well-founded, and some of that is stoked for profit or for attention. And when we were in high school, that was happening too, like all kinds of, yeah, sure, like slash civil liberties, like, eliminate certain elements of the justice system if it makes us feel safer, right? And I think that's the thing. I think when we were reading that section about fear and how, like, not that section, it was like at the Quidditch World Cup where we were talking about, like, does fear divide people or does it unite people? Like, I think it really unites people, but in like a really disgusting way, right? Like, it makes people just united in their desire for an immediate solve, like an immediate fix or a distraction, like, oh, we're not going to talk about it anymore. But we're going to blame this one group of people, maybe the mudbloods, because, or I don't know. I don't know if I'm making any sense, but
you are. And speaking of disgusting and stirring things up, I wondered to what extent, Wes, you think that Rita Skeeter and sort of how she is a representative of journalism itself, as she's the only journalist that is featured ever in this series, and how it will actually turn out that most people get their news from her, including Molly Weasley, who will be a little cold towards Hermione after an article by Rita Skeeter, but also even Cornelius Fudge, the Minister of Magic. And to what extent this sort of anger mongering that Rita Skeeter is good at doing, or mudslinging, produces additional mud, like Sarah was saying, in the world, and that people start to sort of convene, to sort of, stone people's reputation, and that there can be sort of there's a feedback loop between sort of the negative things done at the political level as well as at the journalistic level in this magical world. Like a calcifying of the politicians at the same time that the journalists work to stoke the anger of the people.
Rita Skeeter's in the background here, and it's her readers who sort of send Hermione all the nasty letters with really despicable sentiments and messages and things. And I think that her desire to dig into people's stories is an interesting kind of perversion of the desire to find out the truth, right? Which is like sort of behind a lot of the political issue that we're seeing there, where Crouch is not apparently too concerned with finding out exactly what happened, but mostly with punishment and with security and all that sort of thing. And that dynamic, again, just makes it seem really complicated. It's not as simple as saying like, okay, so, we really need to find out the truth of what's going on, because as we see with Rita Skeeter, you can find out the truth and still misuse it, for whatever reason. And you can also just, you can't just simply say, like Dumbledore, that you have to forgive everybody all the time. It's not gonna be safe. It's sort of is not sustainable, and not everyone's Dumbledore, right? So it's not going to work quite that simple. I guess even with Harry and Ron, we see a little bit of friction here. So maybe often I like to think about like friendship or that sort of thing as the end of an ethic. But even here we see like Harry has kind of let Ron down by not telling him that all those galleons disappeared. Remember, like the gold that Ron paid him back with ended up being leprechaun gold, right? So like, yeah. If Harry had noticed that, then he still would have had the dilemma, like, do I tell Ron or not? Like, how do I be a friend here? And it just totally slipped his mind. And as he says, like, it's understandable. So it just seems to be like in human affairs, no one answer. And so you sort of set up these institutions that allow for processes of sort of like balancing between laws or rules or mores or whatever, and like the particular cases. And so then when those institutions start to break down, then you're in real trouble, and you just sort of like mop up the consequences for generations.
Wow, well, that's depressing.
Well, so where are we exactly? Is that what's happening in this magical world at this moment, Wes? Are we in the midst of institutions that have agglomerated over a long time, breaking down and leaving people in a state of disarray? And why would it be people's first response then to turn from the truth, or to turn to blame mongering, or to punishing, or pretending to be safe rather than focusing on a solution?
I'm not sure about the breakdown of all of the institutions, because I still think Hogwarts is doing pretty darn good at this point, at least. But clearly, people outside of it are trying to take jabs at it, right? Like Rita Skeeter, the Dementors coming in the previous book we saw was not so good, and they almost had a few students die, the one before that. So maybe there's sort of some cracks there, but overall, it seems like the institution is still really doing its job, which is, as we said, sort of teaching kids the aim beyond the immediate aims of following rules, right? But to like really deeply learn and grow, and that seems to still be the most powerful thing, and that'll sort of be borne out in the book. So I don't mean it to be super depressing. What I would say too, though, is that I think the indication is that there is this other spiritual or at least magical aspect to take into account, which can't be really fully contained even within a magical institution like Hogwarts or the Ministry. And that's like, I think, brought out pretty strongly by the dream. And then it's reflected in the pensieve.
Mm.
There's this dynamic of this thing that is uncontrollable that breaks through and like reaches you and calls to you the way that Harry's dream does. And then you have to sort of contain that and sift it in the pensieve in the next chapter. And so there's always that sort of balance back and forth as well between things that are subconscious, unconscious, creative, like the dream, which is terrifying, but contains truth, and then the pensieve, which is where you sort of go through and organize and find the pattern between what you've seen.
And you've just made me think that, yeah, go on, Sarah.
I was just going to say, I think that's a great distillation of things. I didn't mean that you were being depressing. The more you describe what's going on in the secondary world, the more I think that it's merely a mirror of, that's why I thought it was depressing. I was like, well, that's where we are, not necessarily where they are, but yeah, precisely. I guess. Yeah. I think the other thing that I think is sort of a chink in the Hogwarts armor, though, is that there are so many people on the outside kind of lobbing grenades at Hogwarts, like the Malfoy. This whole that there is a kind of board, right? That there's this oversight committee that can find a way to eliminate teachers, or that has pull, right? Like that to me is a little bit of a chink in the armor, that like it's not, I don't know, maybe that's simply a worldly imperfection that all schools are like that. But
that's interesting, because again, that's back to the layers that Albus Dumbledore is to some extent limited here. He has influence over Hogwarts, which for us has been essentially the limit of the magical world, but that there is an outside world and that his power is limited, that there is even a board of governors run by Lucius Malfoy, who works at the Ministry of Magic, which also technically allows Dumbledore to do what it is he does, which is interesting, because if Dumbledore is sort of a figure of God or the spirit of truth in the world, and that's what education is about, it is what is precisely scary is when a motivated political player changes the purpose of education to causing uniformity of individuals, or to have a certain plan rather than developing seekers after truth, and also people informed by truth. That seems to be when you stop wanting free people who can think and start wanting non-thinking people who believe sort of the party line, and that encroachment is sort of touching here.
The other element,
there's like
no, you go ahead. No, you.
No, I was just going to say that there's a creep, right? Like there's a slow, I don't know if you guys have seen Stranger Things, but
yes,
there's what's it called? The Upside Down.
That's right.
And the monster is there, like in the background, like only if you look at it or look at it a certain way, right? And there are a lot of people who want to pretend like the monster isn't there. Look over here. Everything is awesome. And
that would never happen here.
Yeah, and let me tell you some stuff that is going to make you feel better about the fact that you're looking over here and not looking over there, because there's nothing to see here, right? And we don't talk about that, and we have language, an entire set of words that we don't use, I think the fact that there is kind of this, like, for the first few books, right? There's the evil is it intervenes in Hogwarts, right? It's not built into kind of it's not built in. I don't know if I'm expressing myself correctly, but like it comes and they deal with it, and then it somehow is banished, or it leaves, or it flies away, or it is cast aside. And there's something different here that like seems like the evil creep is maybe making its way in other nooks and crannies, And it's starting to take different forms, right? It's like these nasty letters that these people send to Hermione, or it looks like a dream that you can't control that like intervenes in your class, or it looks kind of like a sinking feeling in your gut that, what if I've looked at the entire world from a wrong perspective? What if I assume that the court system always punished people properly, and I know that they didn't, but like that kind of those discoveries are discomforting because they're internal and they're like easy to overlook, and they're more insidious. But like, I think that's where stuff lurks, right?
And it really hits you at home because, it's your friend whose parents got tortured until they went crazy. And it's, everybody who's carrying something terrible, it's Harry's parents who were murdered when he almost got murdered too. Just like when you see him, those associations are brought up, and that evil, like if good is represented by Fawkes the Phoenix, and in this next book, The Order of the Phoenix, it seems as if evil is equally capable of being reborn through this image of the dark mark in the sky, this image of, a skull, that what's perennial death and the things which serve it. And it's I think that's also part of the summoning theme, again, that evil, like good, always reconstitutes itself. And I think what we're noticing here is that it reconstitutes itself through the everyday little evil actions that we commit, and through like the small betrayals that we enact against each other, the things that maybe we write off as being, just relational or personal, and, not at a grand political scale, not worth being written about in the news. But it's like, it's not written about in the news. It's written about in books like Harry Potter or like the Bible. Like it's written about like your moral decisions, the actions between you and your brother. That's like biblical level. It's higher than the political. And I think that's something we're starting to get to, and something that Percy was in danger of forgetting and misrepresenting. And I think he's been sort of on the bubble too, in the background, being such a fan of Crouch and being so oblivious to what was going on this whole
time. That makes me remember that Dumbledore, among the many things that make him different is that he reads the Muggle newspapers.
Yes, yeah.
So we hear about that other side of journalism, I suppose, that things that might not seem important to the other wizarding community, Dumbledore is cognizant of. So,
all right. So to end this week, I thought instead of asking for a spell or a drink or something like that, I would ask a Theophilus Lovegood level question here. And sort of a narrative gotcha question. And this is one I sent you all via text. But if you become a wizard in this world and you go to Hogwarts, say in Britain, are you allowed to return to the Muggle world and use your powers in order to benefit yourself? A, are you allowed to return to the Muggle world and ever use your powers? B, are you allowed to return to the Muggle world, but you have to, sort of like take the red pill, you can't use your powers or tell anybody about it anymore sort of situation? Because it sort of seems like Hermione, or like anybody who's Muggle born who becomes a wizard, has to give up everybody in their life then from before they were 11, 12 years old. And that's, I wouldn't call it kidnapping so much or abduction so much as that's pretty rough. It's very much like what the Jedis have to do from an earlier age, I suppose, and yet would be less rough precisely because of that in the Star Wars world. But what did y'all think about that? Like, is that the subtext there? Like Hermione can't go back and be a dentist? I know as kids we would think, why would she want to? She knows magic. But there are plenty of reasons why you might want to go back to that world. Maybe.
Yeah, it's a very big question for me, what the relationship looks like between the Muggle world and the magical world with respect to people who do move between them, right? Because going back to the question about like truth, somewhere along the line, you're deceiving people, and probably people that you care about, whether it's your family or, at some extent your family knows what you're doing. Like Hermione's parents seem to be okay with it, but they've got to keep it secret from, some more distant relative or from their neighbors, or, so there's like this kind of weird inside versus outside thing that gets set up there. And if Hermione or somebody like that wanted to go back and just be a normal person again, I assume that the ministry would, keep a close watch on them or something like that to make sure that they were not letting the cat out of the bag.
Well, I mean, Alex, are you asking us like what is the right answer, or in in our world, what would it be if we could pick one?
I didn't really differentiate it. I should have, but what do you think is actually the case? And then, of course, comment on that. Yes.
I think there are rules. I mean, certainly there are in the Fantastic Beasts movie series. There are rules about not. It's like the Secrecy Act. I forget what it's called exactly, but I'd have to go back and look it up. I'll do that at some point.
We'll have to research
this week. But yeah, that there is an international magical law on like that demanded secrecy, which is why they kept doing like memory charms on the muggles that they were helping or using to reacquire all the animals. But like that muggles could not know, and yet my sense is that law has been rescinded, because both like in the United States and in England, because there are a variety of characters whose one of their parents is a muggle and one of their parents is magic. And I'm thinking, I know Seamus is half, shall we say. And I think he does, maybe this is just in the movie, but I think it's also in the book that there's sort of like, it was kind of a shock when he found out that maybe people keep it secret from the muggle world. Maybe there's this assumption that like they'll be treated like they're a freak,
and that is actually a big reveal, right? Because part of Tom Riddle's inception is because of his mom being a witch who falls in love with a muggle and uses a love potion on him. It's an illicit use of magic against a muggle. It's sort of like it's a magical rape, essentially.
And they have like the laws at the Quidditch World Cup. Like they had to keep the muggles from knowing that they were there, but there were also laws against using magic on the muggles in a way that was like manipulative or designed for entertainment. There weren't like they were allowed to, do memory charms on muggles, right? That's doing magic on a muggle, but it's not the same as like levitating a muggle, right? For pleasure.
I guess
so. Those two things seem to be different. I think my guess is, and this is a total guess, I have no reason to be saying it other than just as a sense, that like if Hermione wanted to go back and be a dentist, they would have to do some kind of memory eraser of some kind. But because without that, like how do you unlearn what you've learned? You know what I mean? And then you don't. I guess that's what you would need, like a really powerful, what's his name? Their second defense, Gilderoy Lockhart memory charm, right?
Yeah, it's funny, like the MIB mind eraser, that Professor X wiping people's minds. And it's interesting what draws Tommy Lee Jones back eventually is like he just feels like he's still something different. To what extent somebody would still have that knowledge embodied is interesting to me too. Like they would feel forever a longing for something they had once known, which would be interesting. But okay, this is the worst way to ask this question, but I just want to include it. Well, I do want to answer this question, but I also want to ask y'all and say, I did not remember just how many muggles Voldemort was known to have killed, and that is actually what he mostly did. That he killed, what was it, scores and scores? What was the language Sirius used? It was there were multiple mass killings that he committed, and I did not remember that he had that sort of scale of killing, and it made me just wonder about the time in which his killings were happening, and I believe that was the 80s. And I just wondered whether y'all made a connection between that and any sort of like world events, like a place where a political or fascist order, a reign of fear had taken hold that internally repressed its own people, like whether that was something that was happening in the Soviet Union at that time. Because I hadn't thought about the scale of his killings being anything more than, like a few wizards and witches, but apparently it was tons, like thousands of muggles. And I didn't remember when first going through these books, focusing on that detail or even noticing it, that his reign of terror, I mean, people were afraid for damn good reason. Just end on the lightest possible note.
Yeah, I don't know what to compare it to exactly, because I don't know much history that is that time period. But he's associated with Albania, isn't it? For some reason, that's where people disappear when they are caught by Voldemort.
Yes, Bertha Jorkins.
So maybe it's sort of like, that general Eastern Europe, sort of in the shadow of the decaying Soviet Union, something like that.
There lies Mordor in the east. And well, yes. So yeah, Sarah, I remember you noting that as well. So did you have a final thought about just the scale of Voldemort's killings? Were you surprised by that? Is that something you remember? Do you think it was like tens of thousands? Do you think it was millions? Do you think it was hundreds? What do you think that language meant? And I can find exactly which quote I'm looking for, but I do believe it was Sirius speaking at that time about to Harry.
Yeah, I do remember that. He is one of the first thing we see him do in this book is kill a muggle, right? With that Frank Bryce, that gardener.
Right.
Or at least order that he be killed. And just in our conversation just now about like the really tenuous kind of fine line that it seems like the magic world walks alongside the muggle world, right? Like we know that there's a relationship between Cornelius Fudge and the Prime Minister of England. We know that there are some people who like dress better or like who imitate the dress of muggles better than others. They seem to want to blend in. They seem to want to hide. I don't know if it's just like culturally the British magic community is afraid of the way they'd be treated if the wider British world knew about them. Maybe that's based on experience, but it makes me think of like the X-Men, where I think it's the villain Magneto. Doesn't he want all of the X-Men to like emerge as sort of like the powerful figures in their world? And like there's one X-Men movie where there's a law being passed that would like outlaw or make illegal the mutant race. And so like Professor X is stuck between Magneto, who wants to basically have the mutants dominate. He wants to flip the power dynamic, but not affect the fact that there is a power dynamic. He wants the oppressed to become the oppressor, as opposed to do away with oppression altogether. And it seems kind of like the impulse to like use magic on the helpless. I think that like one of Voldemort's greatest weaknesses, I think, in the entire series, from my perspective, is that he generally has like oddly an enormous amount of fears, right? There's like some of the psychological stuff, like the fear of death. So he goes to these great lengths to eliminate that possibility. But I think one of the fears is like a deep sense of fearing of being dominated. So that's what bullies do. Bullies behave out of fear, and they do everything they can to show the world how powerful they are, not by going after people who they actually perceive as a threat, but by going after people who are weaker. And I think the muggles represent these people who they're not a fair fight even before the fight begins, right? And that's, to me, what I think is important about it, is that it's an example of the biggest of the bullies expressing the biggest of fears by going after the weakest of people. Like, I think that I think that that's an important piece of it. And I don't know what else to say about that, but.
Well, I think we had a lot of good stuff to say today. And so, well, how far would y'all like to read for next time? Now that I have this wonderful Audible feature, which I can't say enough good things about. I really love it, especially since I drive so much every day. But how far would y'all like to read for next time?
I think we should finish the book.
Let's do it. I'm in.
Awesome.
All right. Well, we have a lot to talk about for next time, and I'm looking forward to being able to keep up with y'all better. I've been so slow to read, but again, I've been refreshed and renewed. It's like I've baptized myself in my own pensieve. And oh man, I can't believe we didn't make that connection to baptism.
We didn't talk about the baptismal font. Damn.
Oh man. Well, I guess we always now we've strung the hook for next time. And we got plenty more where that came from. Well, y'all have a good week.
So much religious stuff.
Yeah. I thought this was a pagan book. It's like, well, we'll see. We'll see. All right. See you guys.
Thanks. Take it easy.
See ya. Take it easy.